Awesome.
Here we
All
go.
right. Hey, so we got John on the podcast today.
What up,
John,
Sham?
yeah, pleasure to meet you. Welcome to the show. Um,
Yeah, man.
so
Happy to be
let's,
on here.
awesome. So let's begin with who is John?
Yeah, man. Good question. I mean, you can follow me on Instagram. It's Johnmarc.invests. And primarily most people know me as a real estate guy for the past several years, I used to be an engineer, working government projects and stuff, which in my opinion was a fairly good income. But at the end of the day, with any kind of job, when you feel like you're at something where you're just kind of doing the same thing every day without really any kind of goal to work towards or without seeing any progress, you start looking at other things, right? And eventually I got into real estate, um specifically wholesaling and fix and flip, right? Because my dad, I wouldn't say he's a real estate investor, but he's always encouraged me to like look at real estate and buying properties and stuff, right? Which is a no brainer because I mean, majority of millionaires out there were became millionaires through real estate, right? But I was able to buy a couple properties just with my W-2 income alone. At the time I was living in Norfolk, Virginia. The property values are super cheap down there. Now I live in the DC area, so it's a little bit different. I had to adjust my strategy a little bit, right? And that's kind of how I got into the wholesaling and the fix and flip. But but yeah, I mean, it's just throughout the years doing the fix and flip, just learned a lot of good lessons. Um, and met a lot of great people to do business with and mentors as well, but at the end of the day, this is something that I'm probably going to stick to for probably the rest of my life, at some capacity when it comes to real estate.
100% awesome. So what got you? I'm assuming that you went to wholesale first, right?
You know what? It was actually fix and flip first. I know for a
Really?
lot of, yeah, so a lot of people, I know they started with wholesaling, especially recently, and I think the reason for that is because you have a lot of people teaching courses online. Like it's a really sexy thing nowadays to teach some easy money making gimmick, whether it's like Amazon FBA or social media marketing agencies. And when it comes to real estate, like real estate wholesaling is that version of that, right? So you see a lot
Mhm.
of gurus and influencers teaching wholesaling. So you see a lot of that. But I got into fix and flip first. To me, it just, I mean, everyone's heard of like house flipping, right? You buy an ugly looking house, you fix it up, and you sell it for a margin. I mean, it's kind of a no brainer, right? But when it comes to wholesaling, it's like, um, you kind of hear a concept about it, and it kind of seems like this gray area scam type thing. So you're not quite too sure. But I got into fix and flip first, and then I and then wholesaling kind of grabbed my attention during the process of learning about real estate, right? Because I realized when it comes to fix and flip, you have a couple different pieces going, and there's certain times there's restraints, right? It's how many projects can you handle at the same time, or how much capital you have access to. That's kind of your restraint. And when it comes to wholesaling, it's more of a scalable system where you're and one way to look at it is you're kind of just outsourcing the renovation part of it and you're just focusing on the acquisitions, right? But yeah, I kind of started with fix and flip first and shortly right after just kind of got into wholesaling. Um yeah, that's kind of my answer for that. But
Oh, sweet. Yeah.
yeah.
Everyone seems to make it look like it's some get rich quick, super easy kind of a deal until they actually get into it and do it.
Yeah, you know what? I think there are, I mean everything has a statistical likelihood, right?
Yeah.
And there's a statistical likelihood that someone can find their first deal pretty fast within a few weeks, sometimes like their first door knock or something. Like that happens. That,
Hmm.
that just happens.
A
And
fluke.
oftentimes, yeah. And and then you see those cases and they often get highlighted on social media or say someone who teaches a course or has a coaching program, um, they'll highlight that as like a typical student, right? And make it seem like it's just that simple, right? But in reality, um, there's just a statistical likelihood of things transpiring, especially when it comes to marketing. It's just a big statistical game.
Hmm.
And at the end of the day, every market is different. Some markets are way more competitive than others. Some markets you can find deals, but you have a hard time selling them. So
Hmm.
every market has its own challenges, and it's just a little bit difficult when you follow, just say an influencer or a coach or guru, kind of giving you this one size fits all program. Because oftentimes those programs, that's the system, right? And that works maybe 70, 80% of it, but the rest is kind of up to you for you to figure out those refinements based on your specific market. So
100%.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it can be honestly fairly challenging. And in my opinion, depending on the market you're in, I think fix and flip can be easier as long as you have access to capital,
Hmm.
right? Because when it comes to wholesale, it's a big marketing game, especially if you're running it like a business. You're
Yeah.
spending money on marketing, and sometimes you're not making a huge margin on these deals, reassigning it to someone else, and sometimes it just may not work out so well if your marketing is not as refined, right? Whereas
Yeah.
if you're buying a fix and flip, you won on the purchase. Like it's low. You should have bought it low enough that even if things go wrong with the construction, you're over cost, over schedule, you still would come out okay, right? So in my opinion,
Exactly.
yeah, I think there's no like one answer fits all, but in my head, the way I think a fix and flip is oftentimes a little bit safer and easier as long as you have access to the capital.
Yeah. And it's all in the deal. Like you said, it's your purchase price, right? So as long as that deal is juicy enough, it will work out. Even if things go sideways, you could at least recoup your money, right? So,
Right, right. And maybe it's just kind of a biased opinion, right? Or maybe it's just the way I think. But when it comes to spending money on marketing, man, it just feels like you're just blowing money out into the ether. You're not really sure if you'll get some sort of result. And I've
yeah.
done plenty of wholesale deals to the point where I shouldn't feel that way, but honestly, it still feels that way to me.
Yeah, unless like you really got some repetition down and you've started to actually like understand exactly like, what's working, what's not. But even then, the market's always changing, right?
That's what I was going
So,
to say. Exactly. When it comes to the wholesale, like I'm working with a large wholesaling team in the area. I essentially JV with them, right? It's kind of
mhm,
my way to outsource the sales process out of it, where I'm just focusing on generating leads. Now they give a really generous split.
mhm.
But even just looking at their business, because I often pick their brains about what's working, what's not, and like as much as you think they've got it all figured out, they're just still kind of winging at the same time. And it just
Yeah.
it just so happens to work out most of the time, but everyone's just trying to figure it out at the end of the day. Because you're right, market does change. The team I work with that I send my deals to, I mean, last year they're doing close to a deal a day. They're 25 something
Wow.
deals a month, and now it's down to like 15. So I mean, it's been a big shift in the market here. So
Mhm.
things when you jack up the interest rates, like things just change. Things just change.
Yeah.
And it's not that there aren't deals out there. A lot of times the cash buyer, the end buyer, they're being a lot more conservative because they don't know whether they're buying too high or not, right? They're
The
afraid of getting
uncertainty.
stuck in the project.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, I get it. What market are you working out of?
So I'm in the Washington D.C. area, right? It's a
Hmm.
unique market because it encompasses like three states essentially. I'm not sure if you're familiar with your geography, but Washington D.C. like literally sits in the middle of like Virginia and Maryland, and it's
Hmm.
separated by a river, right? Um, and the Washington D.C. area encompasses a good portion of Northern Virginia, all the way up to like a portion of Maryland as well. And you can kind of make an argument to say Baltimore might be sort of part of it. I mean, Baltimore is really its own market, but oftentimes it's just the two cities are so close, you often kind of jumble the two together. So, So, it's a bit of a unique market because there's so many different pockets that are just very, very different from each other, right? Like
Mm,
Northern Virginia itself is just kind of known to be a, higher income area.
okay.
Um, Property values are a lot higher for single family homes. Whereas in Maryland, it's a very different place. It's a lot more, there's a lot more divert, like people, there's a lot more diversity. Incomes are a little bit lower, and you just see it's just a very different demographic, right? And the
Mm,
market shows, like the market's very, very different, Um, Whereas, parts of Maryland, you would buy a house and it would often be a good rental because its end value isn't that high, but you can get a good amount of rent from it and it positively cash flows, right? Whereas
hmm.
in Northern Virginia, because the property values are so high, sometimes a buy and hold doesn't work unless you're just trying to park some cash. That's a different story, right?
Yeah.
Oftentimes, even these fix and flips are difficult. Like you got to maybe even do a new construction just to make the numbers work.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
sweet. I mean, are you doing any buy and holds? I know you just mentioned
Yeah.
you do.
Yeah, I've got a couple rental properties. That's where I first started when it comes to real estate, just buying a few properties.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but I feel like oftentimes people just getting into real estate,
Hmm.
there there's a bunch of information being thrown at them, right? There's like
Yeah.
whole thing, there's fix and flip, there's Airbnb, there's you know uh creative financing, subject to deals, right? And it's really hard to understand like how all that comes into play because oftentimes you just look at them as like separate strategies, right? And
Hmm.
that's kind of how I saw it. It's like, well, there's all these different strategies. I'm just trying to make some money, right? Like, what do I do, right? But over time, you start understanding like all those different strategies. They're all tools in your tool belt to get you to
Exactly.
your goal, right? Um,
100%.
I think a lot of times people try to focus on building wealth and doing buy and holds a little bit too early. And it's
Hmm.
not that you can't do it early, it's just that I feel like it's more important to, if you look at your life as like a sinking ship, and that's kind of a doom and gloom way of looking at it, but we all have problems, right? And we're trying to make our life better. And you always want to look at where the biggest sinking hole, like where the biggest hole in your ship is, right? You want to
Hmm.
patch it up first.
Right.
I believe having a higher income would fix most people's problems out there, right?
Agreed. Agreed. And
Yeah, right.
wealth, I recently just made a video about it too. Wealth isn't made by just acquiring maybe two, $300 in income per property, right? It's all acquired from you actually gathering the wealth. And then it's more of like a storing, like a wealth storage, these rentals. It's more of like a protection, right? Instead of a
Exactly. Right.
building. Yeah.
Right. I mean, you took the words out of my mouth, man. Like at the end of the day, you got to have some kind of active income activity, whether that's a job or whether you're doing wholesaling or fix and flip. You got to have some kind of active income, right? Because that covers your living expenses. And, say if you have a family, you got to cover your family, right? Or if you just have some sort of lifestyle you'd like to live, right? I mean, those things cover
Hmm.
that. And then your excess money, that kind of goes towards, the buy and holds, the wealth building type stuff that builds wealth automatically. But yeah, I mean, like I said, I mean, anyone can start doing rentals, but I think it's more important to, like I said, fix the giant hole in your sinking ship first, right?
Yeah.
And usually higher income fixes that.
Always.
Yeah. I mean, I know a lot of people out there saying, money doesn't buy happiness and all that stuff, right? And, I mean, that's true to an extent. There's certain things, money can't really buy, but those things, out of the things that it cannot buy, it can buy everything else, right? Which,
Yeah.
whether it's healthcare, being able to live in a good area where you don't have to worry about getting robbed or anything, just I think it's probably the most important thing outside of the things that it can't buy. So when people say like money can't buy happiness, I think it's a silly statement because you're right, it can't buy happiness, but it buys everything else that will help you not be
Achieve
unhappy.
happiness.
Yeah.
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 No, I get it. I get it. I mean, the only thing that, in my opinion, money can't buy is time, right? I don't necessarily agree with the happiness thing, but definitely the time, right? Um,
Yeah,
but it
yeah.
can free up some time if you have enough of it, right? So there's
Right,
that
right.
argument.
Absolutely,
Um,
right. Can't directly buy the time, but it can help you get more time by where you don't have to spend your time doing remedial things, right?
mhm,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I
So
think it's always a
back to,
balancing act. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm sorry, what were you saying?
No, I was just gonna say, just always a balancing act, like what you think is worth your time, right?
Mhm.
Um, I mean, you often hear this from like, these YouTube guys and social media influencers, like, oh yeah, just outsource everything, get your time back, just outsource everything, that activity's not worth your time, right?
Mhm.
And there's a good lesson in that. I mean, they're right. At the end of the day, at the end of the day, we're still human, and sometimes it's fun going grocery shopping. Like I like going grocery shopping, like I can
Yeah.
easily order stuff through, what is it, the Amazon app or whatever. But I like walking to Trader Joe's. I like walking to Whole Foods and shopping. It's like a fun thing for me.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
cooking, man. Like I like cooking because
Yeah, it's honestly
yeah,
like what your wants and needs are, right? Others
yeah,
can say like, oh, delegate, delegate, but I mean, that might be their wants and needs. You know what I mean? So like you said before, it's not one shoe fits all kind of a thing, you know?
really, yep, yep.
Yeah. So I mean, as far as I know, you spoke about like, you got into real estate with the rental. Tell me more about that. I mean, because my channel is it's more about teaching people how to get into it and also just educating as much as possible. So tell us a little bit about that.
You know what? When I bought my first couple rental properties, I
Hmm.
know there's so much information out there nowadays on teaching you how to do it properly and just having a blueprint for the long term, right?
Hmm.
I mean, I just kind of winged it, to be honest. I just kind of winged it based on what I thought made sense. I
Hmm.
lived at the time I was living in Norfolk, Virginia. I graduated college from there and I was working there. And my thought process was, instead of paying rent, like I could buy a house, rent my rooms out, and that would pay for my house and I wouldn't be paying for rent anymore and I'd own a house, right?
Hmm.
Obviously that's at the same time you're building long-term wealth, but I wasn't really thinking that. I was just thinking, well, what can I do right now that makes sense for me right now, right? And
Right.
I guess they call that house hacking, right? Is that what
Yeah.
house hacking is, right?
Yes,
Just
yes,
kind of,
yes.
yeah, just kind of renting out your rooms or whatever. And I mean, it worked out. I mean, that clearly it's a strategy that people do, but I just kind of winged it on my own, figure it out,
How old
And
were you when
then,
you did that?
what was that? I was like, I mean, it was right when I graduated, man. I got my job, probably 25, 26,
Oh,
and
sweet. You were still super young. That's nice.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I was fortunate that I got into a pretty good job right out of school, man. Like,
Hmm.
because you see people out there struggling, people with like, degrees struggling to get employed and stuff sometimes. And
Especially right now.
yeah, yeah. I mean, really anytime, depending on what
Really?
industry you're in. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of bogus degrees out there, and
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of times these degrees, they don't really teach you about what the market is actually like. But
Hmm.
I was really fortunate that I was able to get a job pretty quick. And I didn't have any I wouldn't say like I went towards any mentor to ask any questions on how to do it. Again, I just kind of winged it just based on what made sense, right? Like my first step was while I was in school, let me go try to get an internship. I was like, well, isn't that what people do? Like they get an internship, right? So I I figured out what I could do to get an internship. I had some classmates that was working at a defense contractor, and I was like, damn, that's really cool. Building weapons and stuff, building the company I worked for was building the aircraft carriers for the Navy. I was like, damn,
Hmm.
that's really cool stuff. Like I like to get into that. So I asked him, hey, yo, man, how'd you get your internships? Like, oh yeah, well, here's my recruiter. Like, here's her name. Just give her a call and tell her what's up. So that's what I did. I just hit her up. I'm like, hey, I'm a junior here at Old Dominion University, getting my engineering degree. Just trying to figure out how I can get some sort of, get into some kind of internship program. They're like, all right, well, we'll just hook you up on the next summer. And that
Yeah,
was
yeah,
that.
yeah.
And I mean, honestly, just looking back now, it was kind of smooth sailing. Just how these things just transpired and worked out for me, right? But I just did what made sense to me. It was logical. Let me just call this person up and try to get my foot in the door. And
Yeah.
what's interesting now is like you'll hear people from like I guess career coaches and they'll help people get into jobs or internships and stuff like that. And the steps are like exactly what I did. I just kind of did it on my own. It's what made sense to me, right?
I feel like you just took the action,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. That's big. Just doing it. Just go
Hmm.
ahead and having that call to action and doing it.
Yeah.
So right after graduating, there was already a job lined up essentially. So it was pretty smooth sailing for me during that period. And once you have a W-2 income, I mean, it's easy to get like bank financing to get like a rental property. Where I was living, like the property values are pretty low there. Like, yeah, I'm not too sure what area you're in or what kind of
New
average
Jersey.
price Jersey. Okay, well, what kind of
Yeah.
price points are like is the average house?
Right now it's like 350, three
Okay,
fifty
so that's a
to
good price point. That's
yeah.
a pretty realistic price point anyone can get into. Okay, so you're in a pretty good
Hmm.
area for that as well. But I mean, if you have a W-2 income, man, it's not that hard to, get a bank loan just to buy a house. So
Hmm.
that's how I was able to buy our first couple of houses in that city. But, I then moved to the Washington, D.C. area, which is a different ball game, man. Like
Yeah.
it takes dual income just to buy a piece of crap house, you know? So it's a different
100%.
ball game because the
Yeah.
average price point here is like, I mean, I don't even know what it is exactly, but I'd have to say it's 700,000, 800,000 just for like a crappy
Wow.
house. So
Wow.
I mean, just looking at those numbers, it's like, well, how can someone with a normal day job even buy that? It's like they
Hmm.
can't. You know, I, I'd like to say most people either have a little bit of help from their parents, whether they admit it or not, or they kind of have to get married and have dual income as like a survival skill to buy a house, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Or just save up enough, and just have a bigger down payment. But it is more difficult to buy a property in certain cities, and it becomes a very
100%.
different game. Yeah, it becomes a very different game. But I'll tell you what, though, if you're limited with your capital, and this is like an important thing that there's always, I think anyone can take something away from this, right? I mean,
Hmm.
if you think you're stuck or struggling because of money or because of capital or access to capital, like I think the thing is you're just thinking too small because you're only thinking what kind of income can I generate? What can I do with this, right?
Exactly.
Sometimes that's very limited. What if you can work with a team or with a group of people? All of a sudden, your access to capital is just it's essentially unlimited. It's
Hmm.
unlimited, right? And, once you get into that type of thinking, it's like, well, there's really no project or venture that's like really too big, because now you can't
100%.
use money. Right now, you can't use money as an excuse anymore because you
Hmm.
have access to it. And maybe it's not the same as just having it in your own checking account, but there's a way to gain access to that if you're providing value to the people with the money, right? So
Exactly.
I think this is a really good takeaway that anyone can learn something from. It's you can play small by just figuring out by seeing what you're limited at with your capital, but once you start opening up to making it into a team game, it just becomes unlimited.
Mm.
That's
Just like
important to
how
know. Yeah, I was gonna say that's important to know when you're in a market where the average price point is like close to 1 million, right? It's like you as an individual may not be able to start a project on your own, but what if you had the right people on your team, right? And
yeah.
there's so many hard money lenders out here. And the sole purpose of a hard money lender is to give you money so that you can get into a project. So I mean, it's hard to use money as an excuse anymore, or lack of money as an excuse anymore.
Yeah. And honestly, the people that do that, they're just not as educated, right? Because there's even the wholesalers that you actually joint venture with, right? So they're just providing you
Right,
value, right?
right,
And
right,
they're they're able to actually get their foot into working with you on some of these fix and flips just that way.
right. Yeah, it's big. Just working with the right people and not to switch
Mhm.
gears into wholesaling, but I mean, that's the whole reason why I joint venture with this wholesaling team here locally. I mean, they're one of the biggest in the area. I don't know if they are, but there's actually a lot of big wholesaling companies in my area. But they're one of the bigger ones that do good amount of volume. And
Hmm.
I mean, if you have some way to align with them or just work with them where you can bring them value and you can leverage knowledge or resources that they have, I mean, it's just a huge win-win, because
Yeah.
their resources, in a way, are becoming your resources as well. You have the same access to their systems.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I agree 100%. I mean, what got you to joint venture with them? Was it just like saving time so you don't have to go do the digging for deals and stuff like that on your own?
Yeah, man, it comes down to I mean, we all hear about, systematizing um, systematizing certain parts of your business to make it scalable, right? I've done wholesaling from like finish to end, marketing for the deals, doing the acquisition and the disposition. And I realized, man, that's such a grind, right? It's such a grind doing that. And you're often a lot more effective if you can simplify your system and just stick to a couple key things. And if
Right.
you look at wholesaling, there's really only three key components. One is marketing, just generating the leads. The next is acquisition process. It's working with the actual seller and putting under a purchase contract, and then it's dispositions, right? It's selling to a cash buyer. Well, if you want to simplify that even further, the acquisition and disposition, you can just bundle that up as a large sales system. Now, if you work with a larger company that's already doing that, um, they already have a fairly refined system in terms of their sales, right? It's not
Yeah.
this, oh, today we got to do this, today, tomorrow we got to do this activity. It's a curated system that's already been crafted out. If they're willing to give you a good split, um, it's just a complete win-win because if you look at, like, say you want to build a larger wholesaling operation where you have like a marketing team, a acquisitions team, disposition team, and you look at what you actually need to pay them to make that system work. I mean, the acquisitions people, generally you pay them 50% commission of the assignment fee. Same with dispositions, it's another 15%. You put them together, you're paying out 30% of your deal to the sales process.
Hmm.
Well, if you come up with a good deal with an existing company that's already doing that and it's roughly around the same split, it's like, well, you're basically just outsourcing a good portion of your business, leveraging their systems that they already have in place, right? And
Hmm.
maybe their system isn't going to be 100% of what you want yours to be, but it does 80% of the job and serves its purpose, right? So you can focus on that one thing to get better, whether it's like, say you just want to focus on marketing and generating leads. If you just want to focus on that, you have a lot more time and mental capital to just really hone down, become a better marketer. You know
Yeah,
what I
a
mean?
hundred percent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that idea kind of leverages off of the idea that a lot of we mentioned before where there's a lot of social media influencers out there just kind of making these sensational clips saying, "Oh yeah, just quit your job and go start a business." Right? At the end of the day, I mean, a business is a pretty big thing, man. Like starting a business, it's not easy. I can tell you,
Not
having
at
a job
all.
is way easier. Like I promise you, having a job, a 9 to 5 day job, is way easier. The issue is a lot of day jobs don't pay enough, right?
Hmm.
I think it's a good setup for people kind of in their 20s who kind of want to take that path to maybe find like a good paying 9 to 5 job so that the basic things are taken care of, and something where you have enough time or mental bandwidth after your job or maybe even during your job, because a lot of jobs are remote,
Yeah.
where you can still build your business while you're doing that. I think that's kind of the best play in my opinion. And yeah, I mean, ever since 2020, I mean, a lot of jobs have gone remote, man. That's a big game changer because
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but I noticed there's like a community out there. It's called overemployment, where people secretly get multiple remote jobs without any of their employers knowing.
No
And
way.
that, yeah, and that what that says to me is every day job, whether it's an 8 hour job, you're not actually doing 8 hours worth of work.
Hmm.
But but it's sufficient to stay employed, right? So that if you're able to work 2 or 3 remote jobs, that says to me you got plenty of time at any job. You know what
Yeah.
I'm saying? I mean,
100%. Yeah.
I've met like these people doing IT or like, doing some sort of software stuff. I mean, they're secretly doing 2, 3 jobs, man. It's insane. And these are high paying jobs also. It's not just, admin support. It's like, man, like just one of those jobs is a pretty good paying job. They're making over 100,000. Now imagine them having multiple of those. It's like, damn, man,
We
like,
kind of ran against something like that. So my partner, Nick, he actually hired off some VAs, right?
yeah.
Offshore. And they were actually going ahead and working for like three different, wholesalers at once. And we were just like, under the assumption, hey, they're just working for us full time,
Oh man,
So like
yeah,
that's
yeah.
it's crazy. Yeah, so I do understand where you're coming from with that. Um, there is a lot of people doing that, but
Yep.
it's not the
Yeah.
best thing.
Yeah, I mean that culture is pretty prevalent when it comes to, offshore VAs. I mean, they're not making a whole lot, so it's a given they have multiple clients doing multiple jobs, right?
Hmm.
But but yeah, I mean, we're talking like high paying jobs. Like
Yeah.
I've heard of people like like management consulting firms like, Booz Allen, Deloitte, stuff like
Hmm.
that. There's people working multiple management consulting jobs out there. That's just insane to
Wow.
me. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty wild, man, because they're getting paid a lot of money just at one of those jobs. Imagine them being employed at 2 different companies, and depending on their industry, it could be like a conflict. So like
Hmm.
a conflict of interest. So if one employer found out the other he was doing that with another employer, you could probably get fired, right?
Yeah,
But
100%.
but I mean,
That's
there's people doing
ridiculous.
that, man. There's people doing that. It's to the point where I heard KPMG, which is a large management consulting firm, they put out like a company memo not encouraging people to not do that, right?
Yeah,
If they're putting out a memo like that, that implies there's a lot of people doing that, you know?
exactly. Yeah.
So I think there's probably a lot more people doing that than we think,
Right.
but yeah, I guess to the point I was making was if people are having multiple day jobs like that, and we're not talking about like again, it's not like admin support. Like these are high paying jobs. Like people are doing
Yeah.
multiple of these jobs at the same time. I think anyone, if you got into the right job, would have enough time and mental resource to have a job and start their business at the same time. You know, so
Hmm.
I think that's kind of the best setup, and I think it's a little bit. I think it's a little bit hurtful when people say like just quit your job and start a business because for one, that person probably doesn't know a whole lot. The person
About
following
the
the
guy's
advice.
life. Yeah.
Yeah, he
Or
probably
even
doesn't.
the person's life, right?
Yeah, right, right. And there's just a lot to learn when it comes to starting a business because even if you start generating revenue, you got your whatever your skill or craft is, whether you're selling Amazon FBA or social media marketing agency or real estate wholesaling, performing that job, performing that service is one thing and being good at it. It's another thing building a business. Like that's next
Hmm.
level, right?
It is.
That's the next level. It's a completely
Scaling.
different thing. Yep, that's a very different thing. And oftentimes people get stuck on that wheel of just performing that service or product. And you see that a lot with in real estate, actually, with I mean, I to use real estate agents as an example because there's so many of them, right? And I mean, there's so many agents out there. A lot of them have different businesses. A lot of them are really successful. They also have development businesses, but a lot of them are just kind of stuck in that hamster wheel doing transactions, right? And maybe they're
Hmm.
doing a lot of transactions and making a lot of money, but at the end of the day, they're not scaling a business, man. They're performing
Yeah.
that service.
Right. Right.
That's kind of that trap, that golden handcuff, where you got to realize, okay, you're pretty proficient at the service you're providing, but what's the next level, right?
Hmm.
And not everyone wants to take that. Like everyone has a different, you know, vision for their life, right? I mean, the answer isn't
Yeah.
always bigger and better. It's just whatever it is that you're looking for, you know?
Hmm. Yeah,
So,
no, it definitely there's a huge difference from just a hobby and a business. It's
yeah.
a whole night and day difference.
Yep. Yeah. But I mean, what's cool about real estate is there's no one size fits all, right? I mean, you can try to copy another person's model, and that's a good starting point. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of people out there, especially people doing fix and flips. A
Hmm.
lot of them have day jobs, actually, like really good paying day jobs. A lot of them are they have like engineering jobs, or a lot of them are lawyers. A lot of them are lawyers. So they do their day job, that's their active income, and the fix and flip becomes just extra money they're making. They're doubling their income that they can throw into investments later on.
Hmm. Yeah,
So at the
definitely.
end of the day, yeah, at the end of the
So
day, it's how you want to build your life.
yeah, yeah, don't disagree with that at all. As
Yeah.
far as your fix and flips, what's that looking like right now? Are you still consistently doing deals in this market?
Yeah, I think there's always deals out there, man. It just comes down to um, inventory of it. There's a overall lack of inventory, whether it's distressed deals or just retail stuff. Um, there's a bit of a lack of inventory, but I mean, there's a ton of wholesalers out here in our area. They're finding deals, and a lot of deals make sense, but a lot of times they're just not selling because a lot of people doing fix and flip, they're just being a little bit more risk adverse. They're not
Hmm.
really too sure what the market's going to look like 6 months from now or a year from now.
Yeah.
Every market's different, right? I mean, I keep seeing YouTube video pop up, and I don't know if you can turn off a notification, but I can't seem to figure it out. I keep getting notifications on like the next clickbait is like, oh, the market's crashing. It's like biggest recession ever, right? It's like,
Mm.
oh shoot, like is this the market crashing? Like it's like affecting me, right? But
Hmm.
then I'll look at data here in our local market, and it doesn't suggest that at all. You know,
Yeah.
um, and real estate agents, they like to put out content about market updates and stuff like that, and they're always saying the same thing. It's like, well, this market's pretty robust, right? But at the same time, you got to be careful when you're hearing a local real estate agent. It's like, well, how biased is that information, right? I mean, real estate agent's
Hmm.
always going to tell you, oh, yeah, it's a great time to buy. It's always a great time, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So you got to take a grain of salt and do a little bit of your own research. But what I found in our area, and I mean, the market still seems pretty robust. Like, not only is it not crashing, it's growing. Like, it's still growing.
Yeah.
Um, you'll hear people say, okay, well, there's been a huge price decrease from 2022 or whatever, right? Which is statistically true because a lot of houses were being overinflated.
Yeah.
So what it looks like here in our market, every market's very different, but in the Washington D.C. area, prices are just kind of coming back down to what it was 2019, and then just on its normal upward trajectory, at a healthy trajectory. It
Hmm.
was a huge bump from the 2020 era to 2022 just because people were overpaying for houses, but now it's just coming back down to what it should be, and it's continuing its trajectory up. That's what it seems like to me, just based on the houses that are selling in the area.
Hmm.
But whenever there's some sort of shakeup, like a interest rate spike, it just shakes everything up, right? Like things are
Hmm.
just a little bit chaotic. So you have a lot of cash buyers being a lot more conservative right now. Um,
What's your
so
criteria looking like right now? Being
you know,
conservative.
you know what? I'm still I'm still buying, like, on the next project that I'm going to buy as a fix and flip. It's still going to be the same criteria. I
Hmm.
mean, in our area, generally people are buying at around 80% ARV.
Hmm.
All right. Sometimes even higher. Like some people buy at 82% ARV, right?
Really?
Yeah. I mean, every market is a little bit different. Our market is competitive and the price points tend to be a little bit higher. So that's why it's a little bit higher than the traditional, what you hear, 75, 70% ARV, right?
Yeah.
Um, in our area, about 80% ARV. I'd probably go down a little bit lower, not because I'm afraid of it not selling, just because I've ran across like challenges working with like contractors and in the
Yeah.
past, and, just stuff like that. I've kind of learned like firsthand, like I've kind of like burnt myself on the stove, right? It's like, well, you got to have like your own safety margins built in. It's not just about, hey, how can I get the next deal, the quickest, right? It's like that's not what
Yeah.
it's about. It's like you got to have your safety margins in there, right? So I'm probably still buying roughly about the same as I was before. Just up to 80% ARV, maybe a little bit less, just to have wiggle room, you know.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean, overall, I think still moving along, you know.
Awesome,
But
awesome.
I mean, some
Yeah, I
people
mean,
are just kind of really pulled back and just really increase their safety margin. Um, I mean, everyone's business is a little bit differently, right? Like some people, they have like 10 different projects going on, right? They're a lot more scaled.
mhm.
When you're looking at something like that, it's like, well, you got to have those margins built in because you're looking at volume, right?
Right.
Whereas I'm just looking at a few projects here and there. Um,
But I mean, it still doesn't sound like you're just doing it as a hobby.
yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, it's my income uh, doing real estate, right? But at
Hmm.
the same time, I believe you got to have enjoyment in life and you got to enjoy what you do, right? And
Yeah.
I know earlier I said, I don't think we said this on camera, but before we were talking, we mentioned about like what some social media influencers say, oh, you got to do what you're passionate about, right? I think there's some truth in that, but the way that most people understand it, they're not understanding it properly, right? But
Hmm.
yeah, I don't want to go too deep into that, but at the end of the day, when you're doing a job, it's like, well, this is like your income method, right? It may not be like the sexiest thing. Like for instance, quick example is, one of the largest golf tournaments out there is like the Phoenix Open. And do you know who sponsors the Phoenix Open? It's
No
Waste
idea.
Management. Like it's a garbage company. The garbage company sponsors the Phoenix Open, like the most prestigious golf tournament out there. It's a
Yeah.
garbage company. Like, do you ever think the founders of Waste Management woke up one day and was like, "Man, my passion, so passionate about cleaning up shit," you know?
Yeah,
Like it's
yeah,
not about
yeah.
that. It's about making money, right?
Yeah.
But when you gotta have these boundaries, you gotta understand this is a money making activity, but
Hmm.
through that, you gotta find enjoyment, right?
Yeah.
Like maybe his passion isn't collecting shit, but it's providing value to the people and to the clients, right? You got to have, it's always a bit of like a mental gymnastic. It's almost like you got to self trick yourself into like liking certain things to continue doing it. It's not about like lying to yourself, but it's about knowing yourself and building that carrot and stick, right? I think
Hmm.
that's a big part of when it comes to starting and running a business. It's a big lesson in learning about yourself or what makes yourself work, right? Knowing where your snaggles are and your blind spots and like what you're weak at and knowing how to compensate for that and building your carrot and stick and knowing how to motivate yourself, right? By building
Hmm.
mechanisms like that. So going back to the point of real estate being a hobby, you know, on one hand, it's how I generate revenue. On the other hand, it's like, well, this is also how I it's also a hobby at the same time, right? Because I do like to get hands on with things, right? I mean, my dad used to have an HVAC business, and when you're doing a business like that, HVAC, oftentimes you're also doing plumbing and electrical work and
Exactly.
handiwork here and there. Like it all comes, like it's all related,
Yeah.
all related. So, I've gotten really hands on, just understanding how things work, behind the walls, because I think it's really important. If you're going to do a fix and flip, and I know a lot of people just kind of, hire a contractor, do the thing, and have a product, and that's fine. But I think it becomes a lot more. It becomes easier when you actually understand what they're doing, right?
Yeah.
Um, I think it is important to outsource certain services if you're building a business, but at the same time, I think it's very important understanding the service that you're outsourcing and just having a really good understanding of it because it's pretty easy to be screwed over.
Yeah.
you know,
I
Very
agree. I agree. No, I,
yeah,
I love what you just said there. I mean, as far as from even like the waste management company, it's not in you know, the attractive business that, everyone's just generating money from. I have friends that tell me like, "Oh man, you pick like the worst businesses to do." Well, I mean, like I'm looking at the money. I could care less about like, oh yeah, if trucking is a pleasing or, whatever, like HVAC or even wholesaling, like it's all a grind at the end of the day. Money's
yeah,
made in
man.
doing hard things, not the easy things, right?
Yeah, man.
So,
Yeah, yeah. I know nowadays it's really sexy to we kind of glorify certain things like, being a TikTok influencer or whatever, right? And that stuff is cool, but at the end of the day, like we still need like real services out there.
Yeah.
Roads need to be built, cars need to be built, repaired, you know, air conditioning needs to be running, like these very basic things that we consider to be like low status type careers. I mean, there's just always a need for those industries.
A
And
hundred
that's
percent
actually why
agree.
there's a huge shortage. That's why there's a huge shortage in America when it comes to like these trade skills. I
Yeah.
guess was it maybe like in the 90s or maybe even before that, there was just like a huge push to get people to go to college. Um, and I mean, the government was like giving away like these crazy loans, right? I mean, it was great that we could all go to college pretty easily, but what happened was everyone got pushed into getting these degrees, and you had a lack of people going into these trade skills, like welding or just basic plumbing, electrical HVAC type stuff, right? There's a lack of people in that, and what you see now is just the leftover people doing that. Now you consider it to be um, like a crappy industry because you have unqualified people doing these things.
Hmm.
All the
And
smart
that's
people
why
just go
they
to
can
college.
charge. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah.
Yeah, I was
No,
gonna
I was gonna
say
say
that's
like,
why they can charge, what they want to charge. There's just not
right,
too much, you know, of an abundance of people doing it. So
right, right, and even yeah, I mean, there's so many companies out there doing like HVAC electrical, right? But man, if you ever worked with any of them, like I get the feeling some of them don't really understand the actual physics of like how shit works, like they'll understand, okay, if this thing's broken, let's replace the blower fan, or like, oh, the controls aren't working, let's just replace the board, right? And I mean that
hmm.
works fine, right? That methodology works fine because we've modularized like these components.
Right.
A lot of times I get the feeling a lot of people don't actually understand how it actually works from like a physics level or like from an engineering level. Like
Hmm.
I think it's important to understand how that stuff works. Or you mentioned, you used to work on cars, man. Like, man, most mechanics suck. you know,
They do. They do.
they, I think they're good at doing a job. Like, you got to have your control arms replaced. Like, yeah, they can do that, right? I mean, they can change the brakes, do a do an engine swap. They can do that, right? But if you want really good troubleshooting, like there's something really wrong with the engine, it's not running right. Like just real critical thinking, I think a lot of people are just not qualified for that. And they just kind of depend on, okay, this thing's not working. Let's put a new one in.
Hmm.
And that fixes the issue, but it could have been a lot cheaper repair if you just did a slightly deeper diagnose of it and realized, okay, it's just this one sensor on this component. Let's change that out and boom, like it's good, right? Instead of replacing an entire component,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. No, I get it 100%. Because
Yeah.
even when I was, in HVAC, we were just like out here just, oh, maybe there's a compressor bad or something. We're gonna change the whole unit. You know what I mean? It's like
Yeah.
for us, like, yeah, it's great. We're gonna, be able to do a replacement, right? But yeah, I get where you're coming from. It's not the best effective method as far as, efficiency goes for the customer, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Right.
they're just having to spend so much more now replacing a whole unit when they could have just replaced a simple part that was bad, right? So yeah, that's definitely a huge issue in, these kinds of traits for sure.
100%, man. 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, as far as like the industry goes, I I just wasn't like too fond of it. But yeah, I just really want to stick to what I'm really wanting to get into, right? Was sales and real estate. So I mean, that's what I just like lean towards like 100%, But as far as like your background, I know you have the degree and then you got into real estate, but what's your passion? What do you really love to do as far as like money aside?
You know what? I would say majority of things that I think about have to do with like building my future. So it's very interrelated with building the business here,
Hmm.
and I find that to be I mean, that I find that to be the hobby, because at the end of the day, I mean, sure, I can go play video games, and video games are cool. I used to play a lot, but I mean, we're playing like a real life video game here. It's like it's the same thing. Might as well play the real version of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But, I mean,
100%.
yeah, I mean, just outside of revenue generating activities, I enjoy fitness and nutrition, but at the same time, the reason I like it is the same reason why I enjoy entrepreneurship or business. It's like you're figuring out the little steps that you take every day to build something that you have a vision for.
100%.
Yeah, I mean, right now I realize I packed on some body fat over the past couple of months. And it's surprising because you don't really notice it day to day until like you look at a picture like, damn man, I rounded out, So, since the beginning of this month, I've been cutting,
Mhm.
just reducing my calories to a certain amount. And I kind of see that the same as, doing business, right? It's like, let me, I have an idea, kind of a plan to execute to meet a goal, and I'm going to start doing it. And then during that process, I have like milestones to check in to see if I'm doing is on track or not, right? So it's kind of the same thing as running marketing and kind of testing to see if that campaign was working well, and if not, like what can I tweak about it to make it work more effectively, and then you have a version two to see how that plays out, right? So
100%.
yeah, I mean, even when it comes to the fitness, I kind of see it as the same thing.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah,
the
no, I
idea
get it.
behind gamifying things. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I feel like it's all just challenges and overcoming them, as much as possible throughout everything in life.
yep,
Yeah.
yep.
And as far as real estate goes, are you looking for anything right now as far as like the audience maybe could be helping you out with like wholesale deals, funding, you name it. Like, is there anything that you're looking for right now?
Yeah, man. Look, all those things, right? um, More funding is always good. It
Hmm.
opens your ability to do more projects, right? Um, when it comes to the wholesaling, um, I know a lot of times people first get into wholesaling, they have a lead and they're a little bit afraid to kind of take it to the finish line, right? And it's a little bit of you know, you, I guess I had this feeling also, and I guess I still have it technically, but it's what do you call it? Kind of like a self sabotage, or kind of like a what do they say, like fear of success or whatever. I know it sounds really
Okay.
intuitive, but sometimes you're just like afraid to take it to the next level because you don't want to mess it up, right?
Hmm.
Um, and I notice a lot of people have that. It's like they have a lead and they think they could be a good seller and the numbers work out, but they're afraid they're going to say the wrong thing. I mean, if that's the case, I'm happy to help someone out. If you give me the information, the just the factual information of the deal, what they're looking for, what it could be worth. I can kind of do my due diligence as well just to make sure those numbers work out fine. And I'm happy to help anyone out there to kind of get their first deal. Because that first deal is important because what it is it acts as a benchmark that it's proof that you can do that, right? There's a saying out there from a coach I used to listen to. He says your brain is always looking for proof, not promises, right? And what that means
Hmm.
is a lot of times you look at self-help content or business content, they give you this idea that, oh yeah, you can do that, you can do this, right? And you believe it, but you logically understand it, but it's like your nervous system doesn't quite get it yet, because in a way your nervous system thinks your brain is lying to you. It's kind of like this false hope, right? You don't know whether it's real, you don't know whether you can actually do that, right? So what that means is your brain wants proof, not promises. It wants to see proof that you did that, and once you've done that, that's the proof of concept that you can do that, and that's when you become in alignment and doing the next one. So that's why I think first deal is pretty important. you
I
know
love that. No, I couldn't agree more. First deal is the most important. That proof of concept.
yeah, yeah. um But yeah, happy to help anyone, kind of get their first deal under their belt, or sometimes people are just not too sure of the numbers, right? They're not afraid to talk to the seller or take it to the finish line. They're not too sure of the numbers. I'm happy to help someone out, take a look at the numbers, make sure everything, just all their ducks are in a row. Happy to help anyone when it comes to that. Because I believe, if you help someone else with their business, even if you don't monetize on that, I think what ends up happening is you build a relationship, and over time that relationship can grow into something a lot bigger, where they can help you with something and you can help them with something bigger, right? So I
Yeah.
think it's important building that network, because
Yeah. And having that abundance mindset,
yeah, abundance mindset, and it's important just having a good network, man, because it's interesting because we're in the world of wholesaling and finding deals off market, but there's an entire world out there where people are doing fix and flips without ever marketing for deals. And they purely get their deals from just a real estate agent bringing it to them.
hmm
They depend on that. Um, and that only works if you have a good network of people, man. Because
100%.
yeah, I mean that real estate agent that's bringing you deals, they may not. Most real estate agents don't really know how to find off market deals, but they're
Yeah.
depending on their network, and it's like this giant web. So,
hmm It's
the power
relationship
of,
building.
absolutely, man. Like I think that's kind of the biggest thing. And I touched on it earlier when it comes to access to capital. That's the same thing. Like you alone, you may not have the capital to do a deal, but you with a network, like you can do any deal really. It just depends whether you're up for it.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. That's amazing. We're in the people business.
Yeah,
That's essentially
absolutely.
what it is, right?
Absolutely. Yep. Yep. But
No, I
but
love it.
yeah.
So, I mean, so you said your Instagram, right? That's where everyone can find you at?
Yep. Yep. My Instagram, JohnMarc.invests. I think it's a pretty easy handle.
hmm
Happy to connect over Instagram. If someone's still trying to learn about real estate, hope I'm happy to connect and kind of fill in those blanks, right? Because sometimes wholesaling is kind of a new concept to some people and they may not quite understand it yet. And sometimes it's just a few small gaps that needs to be filled in. So I'm happy to help anyone when it comes to that. Um, but really, just seeing the entire cycle of it, just from starting from not being in real estate to being in real estate. I mean, there's a lot of lessons to be learned in that, and a lot of times these coaching programs that people join, they may not fill in those gaps. I mean, they kind of give you one size fits all approach, which will kind of get you sort of started, maybe 70% of the way, but the rest of it, man, it's up to you to make it work for you, right? So, I'm happy to help fill in those gaps where I can, if someone needs a little bit of support there.
Yeah, no, awesome. That's fantastic. And I'll put your Instagram even in the description too, if just in case anyone wants to actually get in touch with you as well.
Yeah, man.
But
Yeah,
yeah,
man.
awesome. I mean, it was a pleasure to have you on here. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much.
Yeah, man. It was a blast. I love having these thoughtful conversations.
Yeah,
It's always good having people kind of in that same alignment.
100%. All right, fantastic.